Around 400 years ago, roughly the early 17th century, the Earth was both familiar and vastly different from the world we know today. This was a time when nature dominated the landscape. Human populations were much smaller, and vast regions of the planet remained unexplored by modern civilization. To understand what the planet was like back then, we must look at its environment, human life, scientific understanding, and global connections. First, the natural world was far less disturbed. Forests covered much larger areas of land, stretching across continents in dense, unbroken expanses. In Europe, North America, and Asia, massive woodlands were home to countless species of animals, many of which have since become endangered or extinct. Rivers flowed freely without dams, and the air was cleaner because there were no factories, cars, or industrial pollution. The oceans were also richer in marine life, as large-scale fishing had not yet begun to deplete fish populations. Wildlife thrived in this era. Large predators like wolves, bears, and big cats roamed freely across many regions. Herds of animals such as bison, deer, and antelope moved across plains in enormous numbers. In places like North America, the natural balance between humans and animals was still largely intact, especially among indigenous populations who lived in harmony with nature. Unlike today, where urban areas dominate, most of the Earth's surface remained wild and untouched. Human population in the early 1600s was significantly smaller than today. It is estimated that the global population was around 500 to 600 million people, compared to over 8 billion now. Most people lived in rural areas and depended on agriculture for survival. Cities existed, but they were smaller, less crowded, and often lacked proper sanitation. Life expectancy was lower due to limited medical knowledge and frequent outbreaks of diseases such as plague, smallpox, and influenza. Daily life for most people was simple but challenging. Farming was done using basic tools, and food production depended heavily on weather conditions. There were no modern machines, electricity, or advanced transportation systems. Travel was slow and difficult, often done on foot, horseback, or by ship. Communication between distant regions could take weeks or even months, making the world feel much larger and more disconnected. At the same time, this period was marked by exploration and expansion. European explorers had already begun traveling across oceans, reaching the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Trade routes were being established, connecting different parts of the world for the exchange of goods, culture, and ideas. However, this era of exploration also brought colonization, which had significant and often devastating effects on indigenous populations, including displacement and the spread of diseases. Scientific understanding of the planet was still developing. People had begun to question old beliefs about the universe and the Earth's place within it. Astronomy, physics, and geography were growing fields, but many mysteries remained unsolved. Maps of the world were incomplete, and large areas, especially in Africa, the Americas, and the polar regions, were still unknown to Europeans. The idea of Earth as a globe was accepted by scholars, but detailed knowledge of its geography was limited. Technology was basic compared to today. There were no computers, telephones, or engines. However, important inventions like the printing press had already begun to spread knowledge more widely. Books became more available, allowing ideas to travel faster than before. This helped lay the foundation for future scientific and cultural advancements. Culturally, the world was rich and diverse. Different regions had their own traditions, languages, and ways of life. In Asia, powerful empires influenced art, trade, and philosophy. In the Middle East, learning and scholarship continued to thrive. In Europe, this was a time of change, with growing interest in science, art, and exploration. Meanwhile, indigenous cultures across the Americas, Africa, and Oceania maintained deep connections to their land and traditions. Climate conditions during this time were slightly different as well. The early 17th century fell within a period known as the Little Ice Age, when temperatures in some parts of the world were cooler than average. Winters were harsher in Europe and North America, affecting agriculture and daily life. Glaciers expanded in certain regions, and unusual weather patterns sometimes caused crop failures and food shortages. One of the most important differences between then and now was the impact humans had on the environment. 400 years ago, human activity had not yet caused large-scale environmental damage. There was no industrial pollution, no plastic waste, and no significant climate change caused by human actions. Nature operated largely on its own balance, with ecosystems functioning without major disruption. In contrast, today's world is heavily shaped by human activity. Cities have expanded, forests have been cut down, and many species have been pushed to extinction. Technology has transformed how we live, making life more convenient, but also creating new challenges for the planet. Looking back at Earth 400 years ago gives us a glimpse into a cleaner, quieter, and more natural world. It was a time of discovery and simplicity, but also one of hardship and limited knowledge. While life was more connected to nature, it was also less comfortable and more uncertain for most people. In conclusion, the planet 400 years ago was a place where nature dominated, human populations were smaller, and the world was less connected. It reminds us of how much has changed and how important it is to protect the natural world that still remains today.